right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Neil, thank you so much for allowing me to speak to this group. I started coming here in July of this year, came for an event for Ohio Life Sciences, and since then, this has really become a community that has really touched me. I've met some incredible people here. I've listened to some great talks here, and then now getting the opportunity to speak here to all of you today. So I'm excited about this and excited to share this topic. This is a topic that I think a lot of folks realize that it's important, right? And all of you all are very busy folks. You're entrepreneurs, you're in corporate, and even all of you as students there, right? I mean, you have a lot going on, right? But this piece here that I'm going to talk about on trust is really thinking of it not as a soft skill, but something that is strategic. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you today about is trust, why it should be a strategic element that you think about, a model that I've developed around trust and how to utilize this, and then there'll be some take-homes that you can use starting Monday. That's one thing I always want to make sure that you get something out of this as well. But I'm a data guy, and you'll see that when I share a little bit of my background. And I want to share a little bit of some of the data that we're seeing around trust, right? If we look from 2022 to 2024, trust in your direct managers, so those who actually work that are in corporate roles, fell from 46% to 29% in that time frame. You look at a Gallup survey and it says only 1 in 5 employees strongly trust senior leadership. And as teams grow, trust becomes even harder to maintain, right? So you can be at a group of 5, you're going to have it. 10, you're okay. 50, 100, that's where things that you have to really start to think about it more in a strategic manner. So I'll talk about this here in a bit, but I've come back from very complex organizations, and we'll go into this. Spent 23 years there. Started my career as a scientist and then grew into roles of increased responsibility and leadership. I look at it, as a scientist, you have ideas get scrutinized, and then you have to figure out a way to execute it, right? And that's one thing I've learned in the business world is that the science has to marry up with the business. So my style here, and is if you think of Bill Nye as your scientist, Simon Sinek, who everyone knows is that human-centered leader, and combining those two styles is where I come in, where I bring that scientific clarity, meeting that people-centered leadership. And I really believe without the people, you can't get things done. And so this is why, when I think about this topic, it's to understand people appropriately, you have to start with trust. So if you think at this point, why trust matters more now? We've heard a lot of talks on AI, right? And AI and the importance of it as a tool that accelerates execution. But as a tool alone, and it's moving at such a pace that you have to start to think also about what happens to the people as they're using these tools, right? Someone has to be there to guide them, to support them. So the people is what accelerates that belief, right, at the end of the day. And so those people are those leaders, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's a manager, whether it's an owner of a business, right? These are the people that are going to help them. So AI is important, but without people there to guide the journey, they're not going to be able to be successful. So now going a little into my background, kind of where I've come from, right? I've been in 3 different worlds. I started my career at pharma. So I spent a big chunk of my career in innovative pharma, about 7 years, and then went to the regulatory world at the FDA, and then the last 12 years of my career in contract research. Very complex systems there. So you're dealing with science, you're dealing with operations, quality, regulatory, finance, dealing with clients, specifically, especially when you're working in contract research organizations, and then people at the forefront there. You're working with people in all these different systems, right? And so if you look at the roles that I've had there within those, and if I look in each of those buckets there, there's a lot of interconnecting parts there. And all of that requires alignment. And the first step in that alignment is trust. So if we look at this, our strategy, it doesn't matter how good your strategy is, and you can talk to folks in large corporations, mid-sized companies, you can talk to to entrepreneurs. No strategy is good unless you have trust built into it. And you just see this all the time, because people will talk about their objectives, they'll talk about goals, but all that is meaningless if you're not coming down to the core of it, which is understanding your organization, understanding your people. And when you look at this, when you look at this plot here where you took at high trust teams versus low trust teams, and this is just a way to share this, but high trust teams, one has each other's back, right? You are working good, and you're going to move much more efficiently, much more effectively, and that's what I've seen from my experience. Low trust teams, right, where there's that concern. What's going to happen? If I do this, is someone going to say something? Is someone going to do something? There's that friction that you feel, and so you'll move through things, but it's going to move in a very jagged manner, right? And that's what you see here. And what it leads to then is really more of that burnout, right? At the end of the day, and you hear folks talk about this all the time. I'm in a team here. I just don't know whether I can be myself, and I can share what's going on. So that's why I believe at the end of the day that when we look at trust, it's not accidental, right? We have to design it. So just like you think about designing an experiment, right? You have to design that into your teams, right? And that's what becomes really important here. And because of that, this model that I'll be talking about today is going to be what I have utilized throughout my career to help organizations get their teams back on track. And so at this point, what I'm going to do is just give you a high level of what this is, but then we'll dive into this deeper. So what we begin with is assessing the reality, really looking at the situation that you're in, leveraging the people, bringing those systems together, then really bringing that culture. One thing we'll talk about today is culture and the importance of culture. And then how do you navigate forward? How do you navigate the team forward? And I put this in a circular model here is because it is circular. It's not linear. And you go back to steps here as well. And we'll talk about this as I go through some of the examples of how this has been used in my career. So I spent 12 years of my career in CRO organizations, and I mentioned their contract research organizations there's a lot of moving parts in there. You're dealing with clients, you're dealing with people in the lab, you're dealing with quality issues, you're dealing with the FDA. And so I got pulled into a situation, and this was where we had two sites, and one was acquired, one was an existing site. And the plan was we're going to close down the existing site, or the acquired site, I apologize, and you're going to bring that into the new site. This is what I was told, right? You're going to go and take care of this, build up the leadership team, and get the organization to profitability. One piece I want to tell you, I was here in Columbus at the time. The two sites were in Massachusetts, okay? And at the time, we had 2 young kids at home, and we were trying to figure out, is this going to be the right thing to do from a personal standpoint, which, I certainly had to think about it. This was going to be a lot of work, right? And when we made the decision, yes, this is going to be the right thing, but also the piece was just to get this opportunity to see, how do you bring these sites together? What they shared with me when the corporate vice president called me was, hey, just get these sites working together, close this site down, build up a leadership team, high level. Well, once you go in there is when you find out what's going on. And so what we saw here was that there was 3 interim leaders there before I got there, and none of them had given the time to really get to know the folks there. So trust was broken already there. The site that was already being closed down, they didn't feel like they were valued, and they brought a lot to the table. They were very strong technically, and they wanted to do the right thing, right? But they also realized the new site was going to be difficult because there's an hour gap, right? It was an hour drive for them to get out there each day. What I also found there that there were quality gaps. The site that was getting closed down, they had FDA audits that were sitting for 3 years and needed to go in there and take care of that, because when you have a client coming in the door, they're not going to feel very comfortable with that, and if the FDA came in again, that would be an issue. So, and then you had clients losing confidence, right? That's the other piece I saw, is that clients coming in and they were saying this lab is not ready, this business is not ready right now. You have instruments that are not in service. And the most important part from a business perspective, the business was running in the red, right? It was losing money, and we had to figure out, how do you get things back on track? So gives you a little framework there. And so what did I do, right? Well, step 1, when I got there, what I'd spend is 2 days at the site closing down, 2 days at the site that was being built up. And I took the time to talk to every employee that was working in the lab, every manager, every supervisor, every director that I had there, taking the time to listen to what they were going through, not just from a work perspective, but also from personally. How is this affecting them, right? And it was amazing how much information that you can gather from that, and really being able to help them to be able to move forward effectively. And when I started talking to them, they said, we've never had that before. We've never had someone to sit down and just take that time to do that. And I was like, well, that's important, because if I don't understand that, how can I help you get to where you want to be? We took the time to stabilize the quality. As I mentioned, we had some FDA audits that were sitting out, prioritized that, got those completed. With my background being in the agency, I was able to quickly look through those, help them move those forward, and get that done. So that was appropriately put in place. We reset expectations for the group, right? Knowing now this is going to be a combined group, how are we going to be able to make sure that everyone understood what expectations look like? I had to build a leadership team. One of the things I had to do was, there were managers there that were in roles that probably they shouldn't have been in, and they told me that. They said, this is not the role I want to be in. I want to be in a technical role. Well, I can create that for you, right? That's the beauty of being a leader, is that you can also be that architect and figure out, how do you get them people in the right roles that will get them satisfied, so they can be in their best and in their roles. So, we built that leadership team, but one of the things I found when I made some of those changes is I started to inherit a lot of direct reports. And at one point, I had 20 people that were reporting to me. And the reason why I had to do that was just because short term, until I could find the right leader that could be there to step in there. And so that was a big part of building that team up. We aligned the operations. So one of the things we had to also look at there was getting the right roles in place. We're talking about a $10 million business here. You had to get in bright people that can do scheduling, right? We didn't have really a dedicated scheduler. Through my interviews, I was able to find someone within the lab who wanted to step into that role. So created that role for her, First time role, we had to go through it. And I even let the individual write their own job description. I said, this is how we're going to do it, because I want the people to be involved in their own decision making. We created a report writing team so we could get faster reports out to clients. And the biggest thing is restored belief back in that site. Within a month that I was there, one of the VPs came through and said, this place is different. I said, this is different now. And I said, in what way? She said, people are happier. I said, because, I said, all I'm doing is talking to them. I'm taking the time to talk to them, to listen to them, and getting that confidence back into the site and making sure that everyone matters. Now, does everyone stay in an organization like this? No. There were some people that still made the decision that they weren't going to stay, and that's understandable. But most people stayed on, and they actually were so happy in the roles that they were in and the way the organization was moving. Because once you get those things in place, you can start to see the shift. So it really kind of jumped into really what we were able to do. We stabilized the culture, right? And this was over a 9-month period. We got the culture in place. We got the lab ready for operational readiness, the site ready. When the sales team came in, they said, this probably took some time to do. I said, yeah, but the people did it. They did it. We prioritized what needed to be done, and to make sure that we're getting a scheduler in place, getting all the equipment in service, and then making sure all the quality issues were addressed. We were ready to go. Client trust naturally returned. We started to win larger packages of work. We were able to serve more clients and move that business towards profitability. A business that was losing $6 million was now moving into the stage of profitability. Why? Because we focused on the people, right? And so if we look at really what it comes down to, the truth about trust, right? What I learned from this is it's conversations, right? It's making decisions, not just independently, but jointly, making it with the folks within your group, being consistent, right? Me coming there to the site each day or each week and talking to those folks and making that a regular cadence was appreciated. And really taking that one person at a time. Sometimes small groups work, but what I found is that one person at a time was really important there in the beginning. And the other thing we had to do, and this is just to give you some perspective, 2019 is when I had started this. 2020, the pandemic had hit. So my travel got screeched to a halt. How did we keep things moving? Well, fortunately at that point I had built up my leadership team, got the one site closed down, everyone over, and we had daily Zoom calls for the site until I could get there. And then once things started to clear up, I spent 2 weeks there, very different environment to work in at that point. But folks even saw that, we can do this because we've already built that trust, right? That trust is built into the organization. And even with him not present, we can still work, right? And that's one of the things I look at in this, that if you build trust into an organization, it doesn't mean that the leader has to be there all the time, right? It becomes more light touch because you've put the right people in the right roles, you've got them moving with purpose, and they're able to effectively do what they need to do, and they're happy in their roles. We kept voluntary turnover dropped to under 10%, when that was over 20% prior to me getting there. So now I'm going to go back here. This goes back about 20 years ago, and that picture of me is 20 years ago, coming right out of graduate school. No experience, okay? No industry experience. Coming out, know my science, and that's it. And I'm sitting in my manager's office, and he's like, I want you to run this global scientific initiative. He said, we need a strategy developed, and we need it because we feel like we take too long to develop our methods. And I said, so you want me to lead it? He's like, yeah. I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to tell no to my manager, right? And so the first thing I said, who do I go and talk to, right? Who do I go and talk to here at this point? And so I started talking to a couple folks in my group, and they're like, oh, what are you doing? And I said, I need to develop this method development strategy. They said, oh, talk to this person. So you start having one conversation at a time. And I started to put together a group. And this was global, so I had to kind of learn not only the folks that I was working within my immediate group, but some of the other groups at our site in Indianapolis, but also some of our global leaders. And it took probably a good 6 weeks to have those conversations. One of my colleagues told me, he said, this is career suicide. I said, well, I don't think I have a choice here. I'm going to have to do it. But what are you concerned about? He said, you're not going to be able to do it. He said, because everyone does, and if you think about analytical methods, how they develop, everyone does them in their own way. And you're not going to be able to change their mindset on this. I said, okay. I'll take that in mind. And so again, it comes back to having those conversations. So I sat down with folks. We put together a team of 8 of us, and we came out with, we started small. We started doing some things just, and then looked at, what can we do here that gets something out as an outcome here? So let's get a basic teaching guide. And from there, we got alignment on that. And then from there, we went into the strategy. Did we get agreement right away? No. But you got skepticism, and I said, well, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be just good enough, right? So if I look at the aligned model, how does that fit in here again? It's the same thing. Choosing those right people, and that was the piece there. Choosing those right people, learning from those experts, and then creating what I call a shared structure. So where everyone had a stake into the process. So it wasn't my strategy, it was the team's strategy, right? Everyone brought their input into that. And with that, we were able to deliver a lot of great outcomes out of this. We got a couple of internal papers that we're able to use as guides for the staff. We were able to get publications, and if you can imagine, publishing in a large pharma company is not easy because you got a lot of legal push there. We were able to get a publication out on this, and we even presented this at many places as well. And people just were just amazed. They're like, how was this done? I was like, I didn't do anything. I think it's the group, and they did a fantastic job. And even today, this strategy is still being used there. So what does this tell me from the 2 case studies there that I shared? Is that complexity doesn't need heroes, right? People think that when you're working in complex organizations, you need someone that goes in there and just they're the one doing everything. What you need is trust and alignment. That's what you're looking at there. Trusting the people, getting to know those folks, and getting them aligned so they're all moving in the same direction, right? That's really what it came down to. If I look at the case study I shared there from my career 20 years ago and what I did nearly 16 years later, same thing, right? Start with the people, get to know them, things start to work out. So really what what I want to do now is really take that time to walk through what Align is, right? Align, it starts with assessing the reality, right? As we said before, strategy isn't the issue, right? It's misalignment. Misalignment is what you find at the end when you start to really dig in there. A lot of times people will tell you, they'll make an assumption that this is what's happening, but when you go in there and really take that magnifying glass out and look, right, and talk to those folks, you find out that it's really a misalignment potentially in the role that person's in, a misalignment with how they're interacting with another group, right? It could even be a misalignment with just what they want to do in their lives, right? All those things that you have to do. So you address the misalignment. Does it take time? Yeah, it takes time. But this step is really important, right? As I've gone through my journey. The next piece of that is leveraging the people, right? Trust lives outside the org chart. Everyone sees organization charts, right? Doesn't matter whether you're in a small company, mid-sized, or large company. There's org charts everywhere, and everyone's like, I got a new org chart. Well, that's not what's going to get people in their right place, right? You have to take that time to know them. You have to take that time to put them in the role that's right for them, right? And in some cases, you create roles, right? I've done that, where you say, you know, we're going to create a role that works for you. And, you know, and what you have to do when you do that is make sure that it does marry up with the business, right? And you can find ways to do that. But it gets everyone involved in the process. Bringing systems together, right? When I think about systems, I think about organizations, I think about partner groups. You know, making sure that those systems are aligned, they're talking, folks are talking to each other. It doesn't matter if two groups are sitting side by side. Are you actually having conversations, right? And this is something I talk about, you know, when we're in the remote world that we're in today. Makes it very, it's helpful, it helps keep things streamlined, but nothing beats personal touch, right? You have to have that time to be able to talk to folks and to be able to work together. And one of the things I saw when I worked through my career is that it was so important that because you learn so much from those interactions. You can think about even where you have emails and you have an email thread. Two groups are just going back and forth, back and forth. I always say, if you've gone more than 3 rounds, that needs to be a discussion, right? You need to have a discussion at that point. And usually you're going to find out what's been the underlying emotion behind that, because there is emotion to this, right? It's not just the work itself. There's a fundamental thing there that's bothering them. So bringing those systems, bringing those groups together. Galvanizing the culture, right? You know, what I say, you know, so you look at that 4th level. What leaders ignore becomes normal, right? So you've got to make some tough decisions. And you know, one thing I didn't talk about is that the difficult decisions you have to make. I had to let some folks go, right? During my first role, when I was bringing those 2 groups together. And why did I have to do that? Because there wasn't a right fit for them, and they also were not willing to be coached, right, to where they wanted to, where I needed them to get to. I always gave folks an opportunity, right? I always believe in that you give folks an opportunity, you give them a plan, but if they don't, then you've got to look at it. It's like, you know, I've got to make the tough decisions, and the reason why you have to make it is you have a business you're running too, right? You've got to look at it from a business perspective. Then it's like, okay, you can't give that much more time here, and what example am I setting for the other folks that are that are there? They're seeing this as well. So so leaders can't ignore that, because that becomes then normal. And building culture is one of those things that it doesn't happen overnight. I always tell folks that, you know, if you want to change a culture, reality, at least a couple years, right? You'll start to see changes, but really a shift in culture, probably a couple years it takes to do that. You know, again, because it takes time to get the right people in the right places, understand expectations, and being able to move the group. And that last piece here, navigating forward, right? You're the leader, right? You're leading this group. How do you navigate them forward? You know, make direction unambiguous. Make sure they're clearly understanding now what expectations are. Shared ownership, I really believe in that. You know, you got to make sure that the responsibility you're taking as a leader, that your people are also realizing the importance of that, and that becomes a lot of communication, sharing that piece. Don't have to be perfect, right? Move without perfection, right? And I think a lot of people in this room realize that in the entrepreneurial world, that's how it is. Well, you know, you may have a strategy, okay, this is how we're going to move with it right now, but we're just going to make sure we get feedback and we make changes and keep that momentum visible. And that's one thing, you know, when we'd have site meetings, when we'd have even Zoom calls every day, we recognize the team, recognize them for the great things that they're doing, because that encourages them. And some people didn't like that. They didn't want that visibility that way. They said, I'd prefer actually having my feedback given to me privately. Okay, I'll make that adjustment, right? You know, to do that. And that's why as a leader, you've got to always realize that piece as well. So, what I've learned with this model, and again, this is a model that was created just through my experiences, right? It gives clarity to an organization, right? It gives confidence, right? That's the biggest thing. You start to see that confidence in people's faces, right? That they can do it, right? Those that are the groups that are working with them, they're like, wow, that group, they've got it together, right? The speed they can move now because they're not worried. That friction isn't there anymore. And then they have that momentum to be able to move forward. So that, this is the nice thing about this type of a model is that it, because you're starting it with trust and you get the group aligned. So this is where I come in, right? How I help organizations, right? I diagnose what's really happening, right? Any organization, what's really happening, rebuilding that alignment and getting them back on track and restoring that momentum, right? And so when I look at this can be anywhere, right? This can be teams that are very early, groups that are really getting themselves just started, teams that are ready to scale, right? Certainly scientific teams, those that are highly regulated. Again, I know that the regulated world, from living in that in the drug development and med device development space, and those high pressure teams, it all applies. That's at the end of the day, what I do is I come in there and I take that same level of detail and build that trust into the process by diagnosing and then getting that alignment back on track and then getting the team moving again. So, something that you can get out of this, right? When you start Monday and you get back to what you're doing, get to where the real work is happening, okay? Don't assume that you know what's going on. Go and start talking to those folks. If you've got, whether you've got your own business or if you work for someone, right? Really understand what's happening in there and have those deep conversations, right? Take the time to really understand the work, understand what people are doing, understand what's causing friction, right? What's causing that friction? Is it the work itself? Is it someone that they're working with? Is it a client that's causing that friction, right? At the end of the day. And then really get clarity on what matters to them. What matters to the client, if you're working just in a client-facing role and you're the business owner, or if it's within your team. Get clarity on what matters, and then take one thing away from them that's impacting them or blocking their performance and being able to move forward. When I look at this, I think about a lot of the people in this room being entrepreneurs, right? You think about your biggest interfaces with your clients, right? So how do you effectively work with them? What I found is really get in their world, understand them, right? Don't come in with your solution, right? Listen to what their problem is, and then use that to then develop an appropriate plan to move forward. So, in my mind, what I look at trust, what it really means is what? Knowing your people, knowing your customers, right? Understanding their pressures, right? I mean, when I've talked with companies where they've got this one asset, this one drug that they're looking to hope to make it big, right? So that's everything to them. So you've got to meet them where they're at and help them move forward. And that comes to make sure you're solving that same problem, right? You want to be aligned with them, right? And then once you understand that, then you can set the expectations, what expectations look like, and then build that belief through consistent action. When I look at this, I think, why does this all matter now, right? We're talking about trust, we're talking about alignment. AI, and we've heard a lot about AI, it's replacing tasks, right? And allowing us to do things in a more streamlined manner, right? And so, I look at all the AI tools I use, right, on a regular basis. but it doesn't take away the human component, right? And that human component was what I've shared today, is that it does not replace leadership, right? And leadership comes down to building that trust, working with your people, getting them aligned, right? Those AI tools will only help you, right, as you go forward. So, you know, as I said at the beginning, trust isn't soft, right? Trust is actually a strategic advantage, and I hope you all saw that today as I've shared the examples I've shared. It's something you can measure, because you can measure that performance of your business, right? So, you know, and what people don't realize is that trust is what played a role in that. And a lot of the examples I shared today explain the importance of how trust is that measurable trait. Trust is the multiplier. So that's so important, you know. I think a lot of times we just forget that piece, is that how important that is, and I hope that articulated today. And with that, you know, I want to thank you all, you know, and I really appreciate your time, and open for any questions.